But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. This is an introductory class, so I'm going to give you like the main information, and then what we're going to do with that, we're going to learn about these flowers, these things like that. We're going to learn about plant families, and then I have the 10 top plant families for foragers that I think every forager should know, that are the most important ones to learn about first. And then in the free class that we have today, I'm going to be covering 2 of those. And there's a full version of this class, which is on my Patreon, which covers all 10 of them, my top 5 favorite, tips within them, which species within those families are important to pay attention to. So I'll be talking about that throughout the class today and showing you how you can get access to that throughout the process. But I think with all of that, we are ready to get started. Phantom Angel Music, thank you for the $1. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so those things I can clearly see, and if you have a question, that's a great way to make sure that I see it. Okay, so this is part of a series that I've started that I call the Fundamentals of Foraging series. And we have 3 classes up for that so far. Foraging Fundamentals, kind of an intro to this series. Leaf and tree identification, and then winter plant identification. Those are the 3 that we've had so far, but today we are adding the 4th, which is families for foragers, which I'm very excited about. So we're going to talk about what is a family, what do we mean by a family, and then I'm going to show you all why this is so powerful, why it's so helpful. So what is a family? We're looking at this family photo right here. I literally got this off of like Wikimedia Commons or something like that, and it's someone's family reunion that is just up for me to utilize for these examples. So we've got a family reunion here, right? And there is a group of these people. You know, it looks like we have grandma in the middle or something like that, and then the descendants afterwards. And one thing is that within this family, there might be similar traits, similar characteristics between them through their relation to each other. But then if we were to make kind of like a diagram of this, then maybe it would look something like this. So we're making a family tree, effectively. This is from the perspective of this little kid down here on the left, me, and we start up at the top with grandfather and grandmother. Bill, thank you for the $20. I really appreciate that. That's fantastic. Thanks so much. At the top, we have the family tree right there, and then it kind of branches out, the descendants from that point in time. So that is what it would look like for a people family, the families that we, know of ourselves. We all have a family, and that we think about, maybe not every day, but in our lives. Then we have what we would consider a plant family. This is a phylogenetic tree, is what it's called. Not important to know that, but the important thing here is that how all these things relate to each other. So you see on the far left over there, Poaceae, right? And Poaceae is the botanical term for the grass family. Now that sound right there, ACA at the end, remember that sound. You're going to hear it a bunch in the class today because that is just the taxonomic term for a plant family. So if you hear ACA, either someone's trying to sound smart or they're talking about a plant family. For me, it's both. Ben, thank you for the $10. And yeah, so at the very top part, we have Poaceae. That's kind of like the umbrella of all these things. And then we keep on digging down, and let's look at the very top here. And we have a few plants that some of you might recognize, like wheat and rye and barley. And because they're closer together, that means that they're more closely related. That we kind of go up and we go back over, and we see rice go up and back down and over again, and things like millet or crabgrass, sorghum, and maize or corn. So, within these are all members of the grass family, and they share similar traits. And you'll see in a second why that is helpful. And that's the question that I, am answering. Why is this helpful? What's the point of this? Why does knowing about these families help you as a forager or a homesteader or a naturalist? And to me, it breaks down to two reasons. The first is similar uses, similar edibility, or similar benefits. So in the top left right there, you see apple, cherry, plum, rose hips, and all of these are in the rose family. So within the rose family, we have all these different fruits, and rose is one of the ones that we're going to cover. A very, very important family. And they have similar fruits in similar ways that we would use them or eat them because they have similar characteristics. In another way, similar benefits. So that would be for something like the mint family, for instance, where there are many different members of the mint family, and they have their nuances in the way that we use them, but in a lot of ways they have similar characteristics that we would take advantage of. So that's really helpful, because if we are learning about a new mint, then we don't have to start from square one, and there's probably a lot of characteristics that are common across the board of mints, generally speaking, that we can utilize as a platform for learning about this new mint that we found. But that is pretty helpful. But what I think is even more helpful is recognition. All right. So here's the big thing here. You have, outside in your backyard, wherever you are in nature, in your landscape, there are hundreds and hundreds of species out there for you to learn. Some of them are useful to you, some of them aren't. And if you just started to learn them one by one, like, okay, I'm going to start with this plant closest to me, and you learn that one, and you go through identifying it and figure it out, oh, this one, I actually can't do anything with it. So then you go to the next one, and so on and so on and so on. That's going to be very slow, and it's going to be very tedious. What if instead there were characteristics that you could use that would kind of jump out at you and say, hey, you know what? Out of these hundreds of plants out here, these few, let's say these 6 of them, they look like they're in the rose family. So I'm going to try to research them first, because I know that the rose family contains a lot by the way, a lot of edible fruits. So by being able to recognize these things, that their family is kind of a beacon for you, like, hey, pay attention to me, I might be important, you will be able to spend way more time learning just the things that are important to you first, which I think is extremely helpful. So, giving a bit more background detail for this, you guys maybe recognize this thing right here. It's a very popular mnemonic from your high school biology. It might be coming back to you. Robert, thank you for the $1, by the way. So it goes like this. Dear King Philip came over for good soup. And there's a bunch of variations to this. Dear King Philip, yada, yada, yada. There's a bunch of them. And this is a mnemonic to remember the ways that we organize life on Earth. At the highest level being domain, and then kingdom, phylum, class, order, and family, genus, and species. For our purposes today, family, genus, and species are the important ones that we want to pay attention to, particularly the family and the genus, because that is the level at which they're going to be sharing relevant similar characteristics. If we go all the way up, if we go one more up to order, there's still something helpful there, but there's going to be just too much variation that it won't be tremendously helpful to us for our purposes. So if you were with me for my Fundamentals of Foraging intro class, you might have remembered this slide, going over some of these families that are important to pay attention to. And one thing that you might wonder is, why am I showing a bunch of flowers here? I've picked Ericaceae. What does that mean? That's the blueberry family. Why wouldn't I just show blueberries? Why would I show the flowers? Same thing for Fabaceae. That's the bean family. Why wouldn't I be showing beans here? Why did I pick the flowers for all of these? And after we get through this, I think you'll understand. Okay, so here's a common thing that one might have before they understand a little bit more about the way that plants relate to each other. So we have these 3 plants that we're looking at. On the far left, we have an apple tree. On the right, we have a persimmon tree. Both of these things are fruit trees. They both grow in relatively similar ways. And then we have a tiny little strawberry vine on the bottom. Now, one might think, oh, we have the apple fruit tree, and then we have the persimmon fruit tree, so those are more closely related to each other. Those might share more characteristics because they are both fruit trees. But actually, that isn't true. In reality, the apple tree and the strawberry vine are far more closely related than the persimmon fruit tree, despite the fact that the form between the strawberry vine and the apple tree are completely different. So, whether something is a vine or a tree or a bush or a shrub doesn't matter. This is what matters. Because if we were to instead look at the flowers of apple and strawberry and the flowers of persimmon, we'll see where the similarities really are. Between the apple and the strawberry, they both have 5 petals. In this case, they both have white flowers. They both have a bunch of these kind of stems coming out from the middle, and they look relatively similar. Then we compare that to the one on the right, the persimmon, and this one is completely different color, completely different number of petals on it, different structure on the inside, different way that it's growing. Everything about it is completely different. And that's because if we think about it, the way that plants reproduce is through their flowers. And the way that things relate to each other is in the way that they reproduce. So, that is why it is far more important to know how to recognize flowers than it is to recognize any other form or structure of the plant. And that is where we're going to direct all of our attention today. So the question would be, well, how do I do that? How do I look at a flower? What am I looking at on this flower on the left side? It looks like it has 4 petals maybe. There are those other kind of like antenna things right there. There's a thing in the middle. What's important here? And similar to the one on the right, different number of petals, different kind of form that's going on. If I'm trying to learn a family, what do I need to pay attention to? And here is kind of a very broad overview for you. Here are all the things you could possibly pay attention to with a flower, but I know there's like 12 terms on here or whatever. Don't get overwhelmed by them. Ignore most of these terms. Here are the ones that I want you to pay attention to. They are the pistil, which is the female reproductive part of a flower, the stamen, which is the male reproductive part of a flower, the petals, the showy part of a flower that you're probably your eyes are drawn to first, and then the sepal. All right, pistil, petal, stamen, and sepal. There's a funny thing that I have for this. Do you guys know the song? It's by Ella Fitzgerald and Chick Webb, and it's like a tisket, a tasket. How does it go? A tisket, a tasket, a brown and yellow basket, something like that. I like to think of a pistil, a petal, a stamen, a sepal, and that's my way of remembering them. So those are the 4 ones that I want you to pay attention to. And then within them, here are the things that we are going to learn about for those details. So within petals, we're going to learn about the count and the connection, the way that they're connected to each other. For the stamen, the count is important. For the pistil, really just knowing what the pistil is and being able to recognize it is the important thing that we're looking for, so that we don't count it in with the stamen. We'll talk about the difference between a compound and a simple flower, because it's going to be very important for determining the number of petals that we have, which is important for the kind of family that it is. And then we'll also talk about flower regularity, which is something that'll kind of be a shortcut for us in order to determine what family that the flower might belong to. All right, so petals and count. Sometimes this can be very, very simple. So on the left side, we have a flower. If I just, look at it and try to count the petals, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, looks like 4, and it's 4. That's pretty simple. Similarly, the one on the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can very clearly see how many petals that these ones have. But there can be a little trick that will throw you off a bit. So I will ask all of you, and if you know the answer, by the way, don't shout it out. But I'll ask all of you, on this page right here, how many petals do you see? How many petals do you see? I'll give you guys a second to type your guesses into the chat. It might take you a second to count them. It might take a very long time to count them. And we will find out. I see 6 petals, 1, 13, 4, 9, 28 or 14, something like that. 20 or 14, 30. Okay, so we've got some guesses in on the number of petals that we see. All right, next question. How many petals do you see now on the flower on the right side? How many petals are we looking at the flower on the right side? Now on the one on the left, I feel like we can kind of count it, right? It looks like we can kind of count it. But the one on the right, oh man, I mean, 50, 100, 150 petals right there? It's really hard. Yeah, someone said I need an hour to count those. Yeah, absolutely. You need an hour to count them. There's so many there. So here's the trick, and here's the answer. Too many to count. There are too many petals to count. Now, you might be thinking, well, what are you talking about? I'm looking, let's look at the sunflower right there. I'm looking at the sunflower. There's not too many to count. Like if I go through, I counted them earlier. There's 28 right there. Looks like there's 28 petals. But actually, there aren't 28 petals. Actually, there are hundreds and hundreds of petals that we're looking at. And here's why. So, this is where the concept of a compound versus a simple flower comes in. Excuse me. There is a family of plants called the aster family. It's one of the ones that we'll look at in the class that have compound flowers. So what looks like a single flower here is actually a collection of many, in this case, hundreds of individual flowers. There are two kinds here. There is a ray flower, which looks like a petal, and then there's a collection of disc flowers, which just kind of looks like the center of the flower. And if you kind of think about, if you can all imagine a sunflower head with a bunch of sunflower seeds in it for me, each and every one of those seeds came from an individual flower. So maybe there's 28 of the ray flowers on the outside, and then let's say we had 150 sunflower seeds on the inside. That would mean that we would have, 178 flowers on this single flower head. The reason why this is important is because counting the number of petals is a really early on characteristics that you'll be looking for determining what family that something is in. And if you were to start here, then you would count like, oh gosh, I don't know what it is, maybe it's 28 or something, and you'd be led down nowhere. It wouldn't take you, you'd be lost because there isn't really a family with that many petals. So here's the trick. If you are looking at a flower and there are what seems to be too many petals to count, then what you're probably dealing with is a member of the aster family, in which case, shortcut, go straight to the aster family to figure out what it is that you might be dealing with. And again, that's a family that we'll be covering in the class. So the one on the left, once again, on the inside, what looks like just the center of it is really a collection of probably around a dozen of individual disc flowers, and we have, perhaps 24 ray flowers all the way around. Contrast that with the flower that we're looking at right above me here on the right, and, it looks pretty easy to count. Looks like I can count 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, and indeed I can. That's all there is to it. So that is the difference between a simple flower and a compound flower. There's another term that I like to use, which is a clustered flower head. And really, I just use this to describe a situation where the flowers come in a grouping or a group. But, this one right above me, we can see clearly that isn't, it doesn't look like one flower to us, right? It looks like a collection or a cluster of flowers. Versus the one on the left over there, once again, an aster family member, where if I just quickly glanced at that, I would think, oh, that looks like a single flower. So hopefully that makes sense. That is the difference between a compound, where it looks like one flower, and a clustered flower head. This is something that is really up to interpretation. So the one on the left is a Queen Anne's lace flower. We might call that a compound flower head because that maybe all looks like one flower to us at first glance, which is really made up of, 200 plus flowers in there, really, really tiny ones. And then we also have this one right above me, a bee balm flower. Maybe we can see that it's a cluster of individual flowers, but, maybe it kind of looks like a single flower too. Maybe it's compound. So there is a little bit of interpretation there, just something that I want you to be aware of. That compound flower does go beyond just the aster family. All right, another thing that will perhaps make our life of counting the number of petals a little bit more difficult is recognizing the different kinds of petal connection. So on the left right there, we have, probably one of the easiest flowers of petals to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very clear, individual, distinct petals. But then above me, here with this one, that's a little bit more difficult, right? Like, it looks like there might be 5, but they're all together. Is it actually 1? What's the answer? And the answer is that it is actually 5. 5 fused petals, or 5 united petals, is another term that you'll often see for that. So, here you might think like, oh, it's all just kind of like in one big form. It's just one petal. But really it is, again, 5 fused petals. The way that I like to use to kind of figure this out is I'll count the number of points that we have. So clearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points on this flower. So that's 5 petals that are fused. This is a deadly nightshade flower, by the way, a very interesting one. And a plant that is exceedingly uncommon in North America. There are very few deadly nightshade. The part of the nightshade family, the Solanaceae family, another one that I talk about in the class. Okay, and then, once again, above me, to go back to the one that we learned about earlier, here we see a very clear distinction of those points that make counting the petals quite easy for us. But then, on the left right there, that's a bit more difficult, right? It's kind of got a very strange form. It's got these lobes on it. Do we count the lobes? It's tough. And believe it or not, but that one on the left right there actually has 5 petals. 5 fused petals, but boy, does that look tough to actually figure that out. And it is. So there are a couple cases, this is one of them, where you just kind of use a shortcut that you kind of recognize, when it's the form of this one, when they're all fused together and it's kind of weird looking, I go to these 2 families. And I'll tell you about what those 2 families are. And then we have the other kind, the easier kind, a separate petal connection. On the left, that's the one that we looked at earlier. Pretty darn easy to count those right there. And then on the right, this is a very zoomed in shot of a really beautiful flower called Harbinger of Spring. It's a carrot family member. And with this one, we might have to look at it a little bit closer, but there are separate petals there. But these are clustered. And what I wanted to mention here is that if something is clustered or if it's a compound flower or not, has no bearing on whether or not the petal connection is separate or united. It can be either in both different scenarios. I wanted you all to be aware of that. All right, now we move on to the sepals, or what you'll commonly hear called the calyx. Now, technically speaking, the calyx refers to the overall collection of all of the sepals, in a similar way that the corolla refers to the overall collection of all the petals of a flower. But these are all parts of the flower, remember. So the calyx of these plants that I'm showing you right here have 5 individual sepals. Hopefully that makes sense. With the sepals, there are 2 main things we want to know about. One is the count, but 99 times out of 100, the count of the sepals is going to correlate directly to the number of petals. So if there are 5 petals, probably 5 sepals. If there's 4 petals, probably 4 sepals, so on and so on. And then the other thing is whether or not the sepals are fused or united. We have that similar to the petals that we just learned about. But also, you just need to know about what they are and to be able to recognize them on the flower. Okay, Moving right along, and we have the stamen and the pistil. Now, these are two lily flowers that we're looking at, and I think that lily flowers are the perfect example, the best and easiest way to learn about these different flower structures because they are just so large and obvious on them. So here is the important thing. We'll start with the pistil. Again, really for the pistil, I just want you to be able to recognize what it is and not count it along with the other stamen. There's a couple different ways that the pistil will stand out. In the lily scenario, it's a little bit different because they're like everything's heavier. They're kind of being weighed down in different ways. But normally, if you're kind of looking top down onto a flower, the pistil is going to be dead in the center. It's going to emerge right in the center of it. In addition to that, we can clearly really see this with the one on the right. The pistil will be more sticky looking. And part of that is its function. So that little reservoir at the end is trying to collect pollen that will be brought to the ovaries for the plant to reproduce. Contrast that with the stamen, right? Because the pistil is the female reproductive part. The stamen is the male reproductive part, which is going to give off the pollen. And so when it's doing that, you can see with the white flower there, on one of the petals, there's a bunch of dusty pieces of pollen right there because it's shedding the pollen. So when you're looking at stamen, very often they will have kind of a powdery or a dusty appearance to them because they are producing and releasing their pollen to be distributed by wind or insects or whatever means that they might be doing. Okay. The next one, and I believe the last one that we'll look at for the characteristics of flowers, is what we would call the flower regularity, which really boils down to the symmetry of the flower. Very fancy, we have two different ways of referring to these. We have regular flowers on the one hand, and we have irregular flowers on the other hand. And very simple. So a regular flower has what we would call radial symmetry. I'll get kind of nerdy with you on this one. It has more than one line of symmetry, more than one way that you can cut it in which it will be similar on one side to the other. So, basically any way that we cut this flower on the right, we get the same thing if we were to fold it into itself. Contrast that with the one that we see on the left, where if we were to cut it vertically like this, and fold it like that, then we would be getting a mirror image of the other side, right? But if we try to do that any other way, especially we can really see that horizontally, we try to fold it, the top is going to look completely different from the bottom. See that? So if you only have that one way that it is symmetrical, then that is an irregular flower. And like I said, knowing whether or not something is regular or irregular, particularly the irregular ones, is a bit of a shortcut to, just go straight off and hone in on these two families that that always produce irregular flowers of the ones that we are looking at today. Okay, while I read this out, in order to account for the delay, if you have any questions so far, then please let me know, and we'll try to address them. But yeah, on this page, again, the same one that we were looking at earlier, just wanted to give you an opportunity to screenshot it or save it or anything like that when you're going back and you are reviewing this in the future. I'm going to grab a little bit of water while I wait for the questions to come in. Sorry, didn't mean for this to be a water pouring ASMR. Okay, while the questions come in, another thing that I will show you all is we're about to get into the families. And like I mentioned, 2 of the 10 families are going to be covering with you in the class today, but all 10 of them are in the full class on my Patreon page. And if you are interested in checking that out, then you can scan this little thing right here, or you can check the link in the description that will take you straight to the exact full class version of this one, where you can learn all 10 of them. And if you're not sure if this is something that's going to be helpful to you or anything like that, there is a 7-day trial option that you can do to jump in there. You can try out all the classes and everything that I offer to figure out if it would be something that is helpful to you. Again, all 10 of the families that to me are the most important for foragers are included in that. Oh, great question. Barnett asks, what do the pistil and stamen look like on compound flowers? So actually in the full class that I just mentioned, we get into that with the aster family, and we show a very, very zoomed in part of a single flower, part of a dandelion. But basically, like, if you had a magnifying glass or something like that and you really zoomed in, then you could see these similar structures on the individual components of the compound flower. It's really just kind of like, taking a bunch of tiny flowers and then compressing them into one thing that looks like one single flower. Okay. So of course now the question is, what are these families and how do we recognize them? And we're going to start off with perhaps one of the most significant or the most often taught about plant families as it relates to foraging, naturalists, things like that. Jack, thank you for the $10 donation. I really appreciate that. So when I go through these two families with you, I really think it's a great opportunity for us to exercise all of those details that we just learned. However, for the mint family, it's kind of a weird exception to that rule. The one thing that I'll tell you is that the mint family is one of the examples in which if we have an irregular flower, then we're going to start to think, okay, we could be dealing with something in the mint family. And it's kind of funny, the mint family flowers are narrow at the top, they're wider at the bottom, and the other one is flipped from that, kind of the inverse. One thing that I want to mention while we're here is that the initial idea for all this stuff came from this book right here. You see the kind of logo for it. These are free resources that they have on their website, and the book is called Botany in a Day. I highly recommend it. I can't recommend it enough. It, along with this class right here, will really change the way that you view flowers and plants forever. It's very important. And in the link of this video, if you go down of like books that I recommend, field guides that I recommend, you'll find this one in it as well. So I wanted to make sure that I gave credit to that book by Tom Elpel. It was a huge help to me in thinking about this stuff. Okay, yeah, for each of the families, we cover the specific patterns that are important for learning them. So things for the mint family, other than the flowers themselves, is that the flowers are very often clustered together in a flower head. They have 5 united sepals, so it's going to look like one portion at the bottom of an individual flower. But the trick with the mint family, this is an exception to the rest of them, is that actually the details for identifying a member of the mint family is better. There are perhaps better ones than the flowers themselves, although the flowers are very good. But there are very easy to use ones for new foragers. And that is, you might have heard this before, that they have opposite, simple leaves. They have square, hairy stems. And then, of course, they are often, not always, but very often, aromatic. So let's take a look at these. First off, we have the fused petal thing, right? In this scenario, I don't even really care how many petals that they have. It's just not a helpful thing to try to figure out because it's really, really tough when it comes to mint family flowers. But for the form of it, what I want you to remember is that the petals are fused together and that the top is going to be smaller and more narrow than the bottom. You can see with both of these that they're way more wide and they flare out towards the bottom and they kind of come to a bit more of a narrow point at the top. That is for the mint family. And then here are 2 examples. So a lot of mint flowers, perhaps most of them, come in a tight clustering in some form or fashion. The one on the left, bee balm, we looked at earlier. one that we might even perhaps call a compound flower head. Just because, in many ways it kind of looks like that little disc in the center and the rays on the outside for the bee balm. And then directly above me, we have a flower called lyre leaf sage. Once again, we can see, and a lot of these flowers aren't fully out yet, it'll be even more clustered in the future, that they're coming in a grouping or clustered together. And here for these mints, the top is more narrow and it flares out towards the bottom. And then the one that I mentioned before is the physical characteristics of the stem and the leaves. So on the left side over there, I feel you can really see it because there's kind of like a darkening on the edges of the stem. And if you were to run it between your fingers, you would feel very clearly that there is a square stem on it. And then on the right side, I'm kind of showcasing that they have simple leaves. If you don't know what a simple leaf is, that is in the guide for leaf characteristic identification, which is part of the Fundamentals of Foraging series. That is linked in the full class on my Patreon page on how to get to that one. Another thing that I wanted to mention, there's another aspect to all of this that's very important for you as a forager, which is timing. When are you going to find these things? And particularly for this class, which is all about the flowers, you need to know when they're flowering for two main reasons. Number one, because that is the time that we're going to be looking for trying to determine what family that they're in. But in addition to that, often the flowers, when something's flowering, is the best time to scout for them because they're the easiest to spot and see. Elderberry is a fantastic example of that. Elderberry is fruiting outside right now, but they're a little bit difficult to find because the purple berries against the darker background don't jump out as much as a big plume of white flowers. So in addition to the full class version of what I'm teaching with you guys today, my full interactive Foragers calendar is available for you to use on my Patreon page, and it has dozens of this point of members of the mint family, or not just members of the mint family, but wild foods, wild herbs, including members of the mint family, and members of the Brassica family. So here is what I would say is probably, if I had to pick of like top families for foragers for beginner foragers, Brassicaceae, the mustard family, would be way, way up there. The reason is they are very, very common. They are very distinctive, and for our purposes today, they are just a perfect example to showcase utilizing the details of a family to recognize them. So let's dive into the Brassicaceae family a little bit more. Number one, 4 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 petals. Very obvious, very distinctive. Number 2, 6 stamen. Here's the cool part. 2 of them will be tall. You can kind of see right above me. 2 of them will be tall, and 2 of them will be short. I'm going to show you a macro shot of that in a second. It is one of my favorite details in nature, in all of nature. Once again, with the Brassicaceae family, the flowers are very often tightly clustered together. And then other things about it is that they often grow in disturbed areas. So if you think about your backyard, if you think about around neighborhoods or subdivisions or around human settlement, there are a lot of Brassica family members that are around, so they're very easy for you to interact with. And off the top of my head, I can't think of a toxic member of the Brassica family, but it is probably important to mention that I'm not recommending from this class that you go for some of the other families, like maybe the rose family or the blueberry family or things like that, that you're like, oh, cool, I found this thing, it looks like it's in the blueberry family, so it's good to go, I'm going to eat it. Not like that. A lot of these families, basically all the members can be eaten, but other ones, some of them can, many of them can, but others cannot. So the blueberry family is an example of that. Nightshade family, is an example of that. The carrot family is a great example of that. So this isn't a substitute for actually figuring out what the particular species is. It's just a way that you can filter through all of the plants around you to pick out the particular ones that probably, or that have a higher chance of being useful to you in some way. All right, hope that makes sense. With that, let's look at some of these with photos a little bit closer. Okay, sorry, I was reading one of the questions about the mint family. Yeah, similar for the mint family. I don't know of any that are explicitly toxic, but a lot of them are contraindicated in cases like pregnancy, things like that. So something to definitely be aware of. And, also with the context of like, because you can have a certain amount of something doesn't mean that you can have, gallons and gallons of it, things like that, using common sense and whatnot. Anyway, 4 petals. 4 petals for the Brassicaceae for the mustard family. I love this. Very easy to count. We've looked at this a bunch of times already. 1, 2, 3, 4. Jumps out right at you. Clearly see what the flower is. Clearly see what the petals are. Same thing for the one on the right, which is field mustard. 4 petals on them. Every Brassica family member is going to have 4 petals on them. And that's really the cool thing. That's the power of this, is that within a species, there are characteristics you're going to find every single time. But in addition to that, within a family, there are characteristics that are going to be the same across the board. It varies for different families. Some of them have a bit more variation in characteristics than others. The Brassica family is one where there is very little variation in terms of these common characteristics, which is why it's so great. And we get into that for all of them for each of the families in the full class. But clustered flowers, I'm showcasing here that we have watercress in the top left, a very, very amazing wild edible food. Toothwort, garlic mustard, and this bittercress right here that we have a zoomed in photo of. All of these have a clustered flower head. Another thing that you might think is, wow, that watercress in the top left and maybe the garlic mustard in the bottom left looks a whole lot kind of emblematic of a broccoli, right? Well, broccoli is in the Brassica family as well. So like I said, these characteristics really follow across the board for the Brassica family members. And then here, one of my favorite photos ever. I really love this one. We have a field mustard and, so looking at right around the pistil in the middle, we can count that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 stamen. 4 of those tall ones that are really close to the pistil. And then, I have a weird thing where I was like trying to swallow a bunch of times. Oh, sorry. So we have the 4 there on the top, and then we have those 2. They're almost hiding right there close to the bottom. And what I love about this characteristic is it's emblematic of small details don't mean small difference, I guess is what I'm saying. I felt like I was trying to come up with a saying right there or something like that. But just because a detail is small doesn't mean that it's difficult to use, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You look for a flower that has these 4 petals like that, and I want you to look out for this detail because it will be there if it is a Brassica family member, and it's very obvious. And I don't know, to me, it's just like really empowering to like, you really feel like you have a handle or more of a handle on nature, a better idea of how to observe it. And I really, really love it. Why? Why do they have 4 tall stamen and 2 short ones? I could not tell you. I really have no idea. That's something that we'll have to look up some paper for of why Brassica family members do this, because it's quite peculiar. Oh, and a bit of foreshadowing, Apiaceae, the carrot family, will be the next one that you'll get to learn about in the full class. But yeah, like I said, the full class, all of the other 8 families are available in the link that you see in the description, or right there to my left if you're watching on the TV or your computer or something like that. They can scan with your phone. I made this QR code, by the way. It goes directly to my Patreon. It's not like some, weird tracking thing. But if you don't want to do that, like I said, it's in the description below. So I'm going to hang out for a little bit longer to answer any questions that might have come up during the class. But thank you all so much for being here. I really, really believe that you can take the information with you that you learned today, and it's going to help you out tremendously with your foraging journey. Learn these plant families, learn them, and just watch at how much they're going to start to jump out at you on the landscape. Just at the idea of someone coming across a mustard family flower, not for the first time, but again, with these new set of eyes to look at the small details of the stamen, it makes me really happy. I'm really excited about it. So I hope that you all had a fantastic time here today. You can like the video, which I believe will help it out on YouTube if you would like to do so. And I'll be sending a follow-up email after this to everyone who registered for it and got the email about the class with follow-up details and resources that you can use to continue your foraging journey. And like I said, there is a lot of other educational material that I have for you to build on this that we're doing today. All of this builds on itself. It's all related and it's all really important. Like I said, the things that I wish someone had taught me when I first started foraging, I don't want you to have to struggle the way that I did. I want you to have the easiest time, the most successful, the most exciting time learning about foraging and bringing foraging into your life. That's what makes me happy. So, like I said, I'm going to hang out here for a little bit and answer any questions that come up, but thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope that I'll see you in the next class that I have like this. If you're on my mailing list, then you'll be the first to know when I have new online classes like this that are out. That is another great way to keep up with what's going on with the foraging season, because I do a little newsletter where I keep you up to date on this fruit is out early. Pawpaws this year. Pawpaws are out really early. Here's all the things you should know about foraging for pawpaw and things like that. I need tests to know that I've learned these things. Radio Bedhead, the test is to go out in nature and start looking at flowers. Who doesn't want to look at flowers? Flowers are amazing. That is the test, and to start to see if you can recognize these details. Brianna says, thank you. I feel confident about what to pay attention to in the beginnings of the broad foraging journey. Perfect. That is exactly what I hope for. Peggy, do you have a class on mushrooms? I don't. I might in the future. Mushrooms are not my strong suit. I'm more of a plant guy, more of a plant and a flower guy. Roxy waiting on the goldenrod to bloom to do a tincture. It's awesome. Yeah, it's kind of like on the very beginnings of blooming here in North Alabama. Another thing that I like to do with goldenrod is I like to make goldenrod jelly with it. Goldenrod flower jelly. It's very, very good. Hey, Alabama asks, what part of the country are you in? I just joined. I usually catch the emails. Well, hey, Alabama, I am in Alabama. Fellow Alabamian. Yep, I sure am. Quill Songs, do you have a calendar of what to look for throughout the year? I absolutely do. I mentioned it in the class, and if you scan this guy right here, then you will be taken to my Patreon page where I have the calendar. And again, you can try everything out for free to see if it's even something that would be helpful to you. But yeah, especially important for this class is that I put the flowering windows on for like practically everything. In fact, flowering window is probably the most common one, because for herbs, the main thing that I show you is when they're flowering, which is when the easiest time to find them. Jay, thanks so much. And Jay, thank you for being a Patreon member. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you could join live. For all the Patreon members who are watching right now, if you go to the full class, and well, for all of you, when you check out the full class, there's a portion where it'll tell you if you've seen this one, just go ahead and skip to where I start with the families, because the intro part is relatively similar between them. Benu, thank you for the $3. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who put in a donation for this class today. I really, really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. And one thing that I'm going to have right now. Sorry for the drinking ASMR. I think about it like after I start drinking. Is some tea, some throat coat tea, which, oh, you know what, now I think about it? Throat coat actually has slippery elm in it. Dang it. I was thinking of throat coat, so I was thinking of mucilaginous. With mucilaginous, we have the Malvaceae, the mallow family, which is another incredible family, one of the ones that I talk about in the class. Do you have any suggestions of other free, cheaper resources for foraging? My Adventures asks, yes. For one, my YouTube page. I have dozens and dozens of videos that I put a lot of effort and time into on my YouTube page of free information resources for foraging. Books, to a degree, I think that books are an incredibly valuable thing. So I also have a bunch of recommended books that you can probably catch in the description down there. My website has a bunch of articles on it. On my Patreon page, there's also a lot of free stuff there, a lot of free little quick ID guides and things like that. So if you just go to feralforaging.com and just kind of start exploring around, you'll find that I have a ton of free resources for you to use. Oh, sorry, a bunch of things came in. I'm trying to keep up. Oh no. Radio Bedhead, thanks for this. Patreon member that's been too busy. Check it all out. Well, thank you for being a Patreon member, Radio Bedhead. I hope that you get a chance to check it all out because there's a lot of fantastic stuff there for you. Jeremiah, can you share your recipe for goldenrod jelly? I can, and I did. I have a YouTube video about it. If you look up goldenrod jelly on YouTube, probably my video will pop up, and you can see the full recipe and the walkthrough for it. I hope you're not coming down with something. I hope so too. I don't think I am. Whenever I do these classes, and I talk a lot, my throat gets really dry. So the throat coat helps with that. Jake says that he's a Patreon member and he can say it is well worth the subscription. Jesse has a wealth of info on there. Jay, thank you for that shout out. I really appreciate it. And yeah, like I said to all my Patreon members, I appreciate each and every single one of you. All of you, really. I do. But a lot of what I do, to be honest, it wouldn't be possible without my Patreon members. There's a lot that I just wouldn't be able to do without them. I just did a TV show, and I wouldn't have been able to take the time to do that if it weren't for my Patreon supporters. So, yeah, all of you guys are amazing. I really appreciate it. Have I seen mullein in North Alabama? I have, but we're kind of past the window for mullein largely. And mullein is on my foraging calendar, so you'll know exactly when to look for it next year. What are some rules you know about where to collect and where not to collect? Diane, I have a whole article about that on my page, on my website. It's called The Rules and Regulations of Foraging. I need to update it to call it something else because no one is looking up the rules and regulations of foraging. But I have a whole article about that on how to figure out where you're allowed to go foraging. Someone talks about basil, which is a mint family member. Hey, Alabama talks about finding dried mullein on the side of the road and getting them to plant in your garden. Yeah, if you want mullein, find one of those big mullein sticks, take it, and just kind of like, bang it on your hand around your garden. You will get more mullein than you know what to do with. I promise you. There are literally, I'm not exaggerating, there are hundreds of thousands of seeds in a single mullein head. Hundreds of thousands. It's crazy. All right, everyone, I'm going to stick around for maybe about 5 more minutes. I grow wormwood for parasites and add a black walnut tincture. Do I talk about medicinal gardening? PJ Hoover, I don't really I talk about gardening a little bit. Like for a few wild species, I'll talk about how to grow them. But I wouldn't say that I talk about gardening. However, if you look up Miss Magnolia's Moxie, she has a lot of great resources for medicinal gardening if that's something that you're interested in. Not my forte, to be honest. I forage because I'm not good at growing. Are Kentucky bloom times around the same time as Alabama, or is it slightly earlier because of being more northern? It's a great question, Teresa. The answer is there will be some variation. So a lot of things will happen in Alabama at the beginning of the season earlier, and then in Alabama at the end of the season later. Yeah, later. I got that right. That being said, if you look at the foraging calendar, it isn't like here's what to do in January, February, March, April. It's about season. So here's what you're doing in early spring, middle spring, late spring, summer, fall, etc. And in the calendar, in the notes for at the beginning, I show you how to calibrate the timing for it based on your area, which has to do with things like the first frost date and the first frost date in the autumn and the last frost date in the spring, things like that. Because depending on where you are, seasons will be either more compressed or more stretched out, and other factors play into it as well. Jay asked, do I have a video or more info on viburnum? No, I don't really. I don't have a lot of info on viburnum. But Jay, if you send me a DM on Patreon, you can tell me what questions you have about viburnum, and I can tell you what I know, which might not be a whole lot, I'm afraid, but I'll tell you as much as I can. Tracy asks, but I'm wondering what to know about location differences. I'm in Northern California. So, Tracy, it depends on what you're asking about. So, what I'll tell you is, for the purposes of the calendar specifically, if you're in Northern California, there's not going to be a major amount of overlap between what I have on there and what you have in Northern California. And timing would be different as well. Climate is quite different in Northern California as well compared to Eastern North America in many ways. So a couple things to just make note of there. Ben New, very common useful edibles in a survival situation along the lines of edible, tree, cambium, etc. I read that as like for your ex, like your ex-girlfriend, not for example initially. Yeah, so like in a survival situation, the two immediate ones that come to mind would be slippery elm by far, one of my favorite wild trees in general, and pine. Those are the two ones that come to mind. Slippery elm would be a much more useful one, I would say, in a survival situation. Yeah, if you're like trying to get calories like as much as you can really quick in a survival situation, you don't have any tools, you don't have anything, slippery elm is the one that I would recommend. Bonsoir asks, have I heard of iNaturalist? It's not the most accurate, but has a nice community, and the identification feature is surprisingly solid. Yes, iNaturalist is my number one recommended plant identification app by far. And a lot of people, I think, are probably using iNaturalist incorrectly. Like, from what I was reading on the paper that aggregated the identification accuracy of all of them, that said iNaturalist was the lowest. I think a lot of people are probably not using it right. Like, they're not making use of the capability of including multiple photos or things like that, because a lot of the other ones just like, take a picture of one thing and it'll try to tell you. But even then, what I teach people, this is in my Fundamentals of Foraging intro class, is I don't care how accurate that any of those identification apps are. I'm never going to use them completely to rely on whether or not I'm going to eat something, ever. I will never ever do that. I don't care how good they get. So, maybe iNaturalist is like a little bit not as good as the other ones. That's fine for me because the community aspect of it, as you mentioned, is fantastic. And also using it for getting an idea of like what the ranges of things are. A lot of people comment on my videos, and I need to be better about this. I always forget to do it. They're like, where are these things growing that you're talking about? And I always want to be like, you can just use iNaturalist. Whenever I talk about any plant, you can look it up on iNaturalist and find out if it is growing in your area or not. It's really a fantastic tool. Kristen, what channel did you say for medicinal herb info? Laramie, could you link her to Miss Magnolia's Moxie or where she can get more information about that? Because I don't know if there's a YouTube channel for that one particularly. Is there a plant that you find surprisingly delicious or surprisingly gross? Great video, thank you. I'm glad the video was helpful. Gross one, yeah, I got it right off the bat for you. I think dandelion is disgusting. I do not like dandelion, despite how much people talk about how good it is. I think dandelion is terrible. I think there are far better wild greens. So that's my hot take on dandelion. Something that is surprisingly delicious. I'm going to think about things that I've tried recently, surprisingly delicious. Off the top of my head, just first one that came to mind, slippery elm. That I actually wildcrafted myself. Surprisingly delicious. Like really good, really sweet. That was good. Also, Siberian elm, which is related to slippery elm, I thought tasted even better than slippery elm did. I encourage people to forage for Siberian elm invasive instead of slippery elm. I'm trying to think of another one. Surprisingly delicious. I know that they're out there. Some people aren't going to like this, but I'll tell you what. Cicada. Surprisingly delicious. It really was. It was surprisingly delicious. I made a whole video about cicada for the periodical cicadas that came out and how you can forage for them if you happen to be interested in something like that. Yeah, dandelion better dried, made into a tea. I agree. Yeah, the only way that I like dandelion is to chop up the roots, roast them, and make a nice tea with them. But I do not like eating them. In my area, they are just unpalatably bitter. They're never good. Never good. Okay, everyone. That's all that I've got. Please check out the full class. I really think that you're going to enjoy it if you liked what we did here. And yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you all for being here. Look out for the follow-up email that I'll send to all of you. And if you got the email, then you're on the mailing list, which means that you'll be notified about the next class that I have, which I haven't decided on yet, which one that I'll do next. We're not coming up on winter, but winter's getting closer, so maybe we'll do another iteration of the winter tree identification class, because that's one that I really enjoy teaching. So thank you all so much, and I will see you around. I'll see you in the next one, and hopefully I'll see you in my Patreon community. Thank you all. You guys are great.